So the course will then start with some foundation in research. It will then continue with how indeed a theory is built and what it covers. It will then go into some of the substance of that, meaning the actual use of historical precedent to show that Africa has indeed made an impact from the very beginning of times. Now, as has already been stated, and the introduction was extraordinary, I have had, now 37 years as a senior professor of architecture at Kent State University. I've had the opportunity to travel throughout the continent from, I like to say, from Dakar to Dar, or Dar es Salaam. That'll take you all the way across from west to east, and from Cairo to Cape Town, and a lot in between. The study was not just of the great works of Kemet, which of course we know we've referred to for many years based on the Greek tongue as Egypt, but we know that that's our land and played a significant part in the development of monumental architecture across the annals of time, actually. I also am a practitioner. And so my work, even as a scholar, was to say, what does this mean to the modern world? How can we actually build? How can we design? How can we put forth a way in which we can express ourselves? So we have a theory, and that theory is called Afrocentric architecture. And then it says that there is a distinct manifestation that can come out of Africa's origins, be they inspiration or sometimes even, you might say, appropriation to a degree of elements that come from culture, history, or the environment itself. So thank you for listening. I'm hoping everybody joins in. I was given an opportunity to introduce my work or myself just within a very narrow time frame, and my time is up. So we hope to see you in the course. Take care. I'll turn it back over to the next person that Chibuso will introduce.
Okay, that'll be me actually. I'm gonna jump right in. Thank you, Professor Hughes. And I just want to let everybody know that's my mentor, all-time mentor, Professor Hughes. My name is Madali Okumabua, and my course is titled The Evolution and Transformation of African-Centered Architecture. My background is in design, in architecture, urban studies, real estate, interior design, asset management, and also African studies. Why African studies? I have a master's in that because I needed to use an African lens to understand the built environment, to understand how Africans build space. And so my course introduces students to the concepts for developing new African architectural languages inspired by the culture and technology and of traditional and contemporary African societies. The course surveys both the African and diaspora built environment, teaching design practices that are culturally and environmentally sustainable. Students will be introduced to the evolution of CPD Africa, how as a student in class, I wasn't encouraged to bring my identity to my projects, and how that gave birth to this particular platform. Of course, learning from masters and mentors. I've already mentioned one, David Hughes, and my next mentor is Master Architect Builder Dimas Wonko. I bring all that I learned from them to the table, and my course is a response to the challenge that they gave me, right? As they pass down this knowledge, where would I take? And where would I take, how would I pass that challenge on to the next generation? How will they take that information and build better environments for us? And so here you see the lineup, our schedule, what we cover week 1 through week 6. We will take you through aesthetics. You know, aesthetics is so important, is what you see. What tells you you are in a specific space just by what you see. If you see Yoruba aesthetics, that should tell you you are in Yoruba country, or Ndebele aesthetics, you are in Ndebele country. African American aesthetics, you must be somewhere in Atlanta or Compton or New York. So aesthetics is very important. Spirituality, key. Without spirituality, you haven't started a conversation on African architecture. The whole built environment is based on their relationship with the higher power, and of course, nature. So spirituality is important, functionality, materials, key. You can't talk about architecture without materials. What's available to you? What's the science and technology embedded in those materials? Because that's what's important for your own location. How have your own ancestors perfected that science so you can create sustainable built spaces? So we speak on all of that. And then we also have some homework assignments, research that our students may want to contribute to the discourse. Some of the elements that you're seeing here, or the submissions that you're seeing here, came in from our competitions. And you will see how they use materials, bamboo, thatch, of course, all traditional red clay earth bricks, but they're all contemporary. So we will talk about and share a lot of this information, of course, with our students, and send them on their way to be challenged to create such when they sign up for our design studios. And so my course is all about the evolution and transformation. What were we doing before? What are we doing now? What can we do in the future? Afrofuturism and architecture, how do they meet? Yes, and I will conclude my class with that and pass on to the next professor. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'll just jump in. Hello, everyone. I'm Oluwatoyin Shubesan, and I'm an architect. I'm a researcher, and I look at cultural implications as they affect architecture. And I teach history of architecture. I'm a professor of architecture. He's teaching history of architecture at the University of Ajayi Crowther here in Nigeria, Oyo State. On CPDI, my course will be on the evolution of Yoruba traditional architecture and contemporary environment. The course introduces students to Yoruba traditional architecture, art, culture, and beliefs by outlining theories, philosophies, and aesthetics that serves as guiding principles for their worldview and their construction methods. My course gives an overview of a traditional style dictated by culture, environmental conditions, and available materials. The course outlines important architectural elements and languages associated with Yoruba traditional architecture and how these elements can be utilized in solving contemporary environmental issues. In doing this, we have 6 weeks. The course will run through 6 weeks. The idea of the course is to introduce the students to the architecture of the Yoruba people and let people know how they came about their forms, how the culture and their lifestyle has affected their traditional way of building, how spirituality is actually the core of their built environment and their philosophies. Also, within the course, we'll be looking at the elements of aesthetics, decorative and symbolic elements in terms of ornamentation. So we will see how they translated their culture through ornamentation. The elements, materials and community development philosophies as well will be looked at, and we'll see how important it is for us to build as a group of people. Africans are known as communal people, and the Yoruba people are a good example. The future and evolution as well as transformation of Yoruba traditional architecture, we'll be looking at that using the works of Demas Nwoko, who is actually an Igbo man, lived in Yoruba land and got influenced by Yoruba traditional architectural language and elements. And we will see how these elements have played out in some of his works. As well as these elements, we'll look at how these elements can also be taken forward by designers, students architects, environmentalists in solving issues, in solving contemporary environmental issues within the built environment. And it's going to be an interesting one to know how the works of the Yoruba people have also influenced contemporary buildings today. Everyone is welcome to this class, and you're welcome to have fun in it as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Diana Agbefi, and I'm so excited to be taking this course on CPDI Africa. My background is in architecture with a passion for green design and green architecture from the African perspective. I have a passion for green lifestyles, and I believe that if you're able to transform habitats, you'll be able to transform the habits of people. We're going to be looking at green architecture from the context of the African person and how we live, how we go about our daily activities. Especially with the rising concerns of climate change, we're going to be going back to nature to heal, to thrive, and to live green lifestyles of excellence. With that said, the course is going to be covering, first of all, an introduction to green design and climate change. It's going to be covering green design and climate change, and how we can use building materials, how we can analyze the rising climate changes and situations all around the world to be able to apply it contextually, depending on wherever your architecture is based. So this is going to create a framework of understanding from the point of sustainability, because when you look at African architecture in general, we live a very sustainable lifestyle, especially the fact that we're still a developing country. I see it as a blessing because we still have a lot of space to grow. We still have a lot of space to be able to do more research, and we still have a lot of space to innovate. For instance, when we look at the building materials that are available locally and how they respond to the climate, we're going to be taking different elements of African-centered design and understanding our urban expressions, where we have edible gardens all along our walkways. We have greywater collection systems where we used to collect water. And these are systems that presently are being worked on to create innovative solutions so that it is applicable all around the world. We're also going to be looking at the lifestyle and aesthetics of African design and how that relates to green design. We're also going to be analyzing different works and discussing different works of various architects, mainly African, like Francis Kere, Esther Majubule from South Africa, Francis Kere, Adekunle Adeyemi is a Nigerian, the architect that worked on the wooden building at Makoko, who has advanced to be producing different prototypes that are mainly used all around the world now. And we should also be looking at climate change from the aspect of architectural design and how architecture can be used as a tool to solve climate problems. And then we should also be looking at how to make our existing vernacular buildings resilient in terms of, as I said, the rising climate challenge that we're having. As architects and as designers, it is our responsibility to take care of the environment and our responsibility to adapt our buildings to suit changing times. So I believe that with this course, you would have a theoretical framework that you can begin analysis on, no matter where your compass is globally, because we as global citizens should be able to solve problems across board. Even as we're looking into African-centered architecture for inspiration, we shall also be relating it with other green designs that are going to be relatable from all around the world. It's also going to help us to be able to tell our story from our own perspective, understand African narratives, understand what it means to specialize in green design, because it's an industry that is still coming up. And understanding it now is going to be a key factor to the future of architecture, because we are going green across board. It will also give to policymakers. It's also going to give context to be able to create policies that will support this. So you're all welcome to this class, and I hope you join in. Thank you. Over to the next presenter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Coles, and I am both a practicing architect here in Atlanta, Georgia, at a firm called Chasm Architecture, and an instructor at Kennesaw State University. And I'm very excited to be teaching a course through CPDI Africa called Towards an African American Inspired Architecture. So in this course, we'll be exploring an approach to architectural design that celebrates African American communities in the United States through referencing their culture, aesthetics, building practices and materials, and sense of spirituality. Obviously, this course is open for everyone, but we'll focus on the African-American experience in the United States. And it is an interesting one because it's constantly evolving. And I consider this course as more of an exploration of that, because it's still very much in the works what African-American architecture can be. And while that can be daunting sometimes, it can also be very exciting and promote some different discoveries. We'll root the approach, of course, in the collective African diaspora heritage of African Americans and examine how modern cultural trends relate back to traditional African traditions brought over by our ancestors. My mentor, Madeline, likes to use the term Africanisms. I love that, so I'm going to use the term Africanisms to describe those. The goal of this course is to discuss and propose new forms of architecture inspired by the way African Americans perceive and utilize space, as well as their unique challenges within an American context. So what is the Black experience like in an American context? All right. W.E.B. Du Bois describes the African American experience in America as one of a bipart experience, where we must act one way around our own race, but we feel like we need to act another way around other races. I think this is interesting because if you look at buildings like the National Museum for African American Heritage and Culture in Washington, D.C., you'll see that there's this idea of the veil, the seeing but not being seen. So almost within, we're free to be ourselves, but outside of that, we feel like we have to change sometimes. So we'll explore how that structure kind of basically is symbolic of the African-American experience in the US. Booker T. Washington proposes the idea of pragmatic industriousness, and he describes a can-do attitude amongst Black Americans to sometimes have these opportunities to isolate ourselves from the gaze of white society, so to speak, to really engage in a form of self-sufficiency, or what can we create when we're kind of separated from those constraints of the society around us. And those ideas play forward through his personal home, the Oaks, which there's a picture of below, and also Tuskegee University, designed by an African-American architect named Robert R. Taylor, and also by students from Tuskegee University. And then finally, Saidiya Hartman describes the African-American experience as one of performances of opposition, basically saying that it's always been important for Black Americans and African Americans to really appropriate space within American society, to bring their ideals and kind of their sense of self-worth and their cultural views to the forefront for everyone to see. Though sometimes there's a tendency to push those ideals to the periphery. We won't allow that to happen. So we do these performances to bring our culture and our ideas to the forefront. And this shows through in structures such as the Weeksville Heritage Center in New York, which begins to celebrate an existing community of Black Americans that was once there, almost lost as a result of kind of the expansion of the city, but ultimately saved by these 3 homes that an historian noticed were actually very significant to the past history of the site, which relates back to a recently emancipated Black American community. So these and other projects we'll explore throughout the course to really try to pinpoint where African-American architecture can go in the future, where it has gone in the past, and really provide you with tools so that you can begin this discovery in your own right. And like I said, this is open for everyone, and it's a multicultural discussion. So the prerequisite is to have an opinion and come with that opinion and respect others. And thank you. I'll turn it over to the next person.
Hi, everybody. Amma wasn't able to join us today, so I'll just be presenting on her behalf. This is Amma Asamoah. She is a practicing architect and assistant professor at Tuskegee University. The course description is as follows. It introduces students to varying building types and architectural styles native to Ghana. It surveys vernacular, colonial, and contemporary buildings that have shaped the built environment of this rapidly urbanizing and historically rich African nation. Students will explore the complex socioeconomic systems and the modern day challenges faced by the burgeoning capital city of Accra. They will also research and propose culturally and environmentally sustainable design solutions for the region. She's teaching it on Saturdays between 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard. Next slide. So she wanted us to go through here and give you an introduction of the course schedule. Week 1 will be the regional Ghanaian vernacular architecture theory. Week 2 will be architecture of the Ashanti Kingdom. Week 3 will be colonialism and concrete, the impact of foreign building material in a tropical environment. Week 4 will be architecture of independence, Kwame Nkrumah's vision for Ghana. Week 5 will be urbanism in Accra, building, design, infrastructure, and planning challenges. And week 6 will be an architectural innovators of Ghana, Ajay, Ado, and Asare. And I wish I could speak more to her, but I don't want to say anything that's not correct or inaccurate. But on behalf of her, she hopes that you join her class. She's a very thoughtful and insightful woman. So we'll drop her email later if you guys want to have more information about that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ike Agbin, and I'm a licensed architect in Washington, D.C. area. My background is in architecture. I studied at the University of Nigeria and came to the U.S., did a master's degree in architecture at Virginia Tech. So I currently work in infill housing, urban housing development in Washington, D.C. My passion for this course is really centered on very practical needs. The fact that African architecture, even though the course is centered on Igbo and Bamileke of Cameroon, African architecture has a relevance in the sense that there's a commonality that you find in African architecture other than what you see aesthetically. there's a very, very important sense of what I call functional aesthetics with African architecture. So in the course, we use the Igbo and Bamileke examples to examine how the traditional art and architecture forms, how well they are based, the concepts behind the buildings and spaces, and how these concepts can be translated into contemporary architecture. We trace even from furniture, fine art, wall paintings, two-dimensional and three-dimensional art to exemplify how systems used in traditional architecture have been used in our case studies to successfully exemplify what I call the Africanisque, which is the contemporary African architecture. Some examples that we show, as you can see in the photo, there's an Mbari dwelling, there's in the center set, and on the left side is a fairly more modern chapel made by one of the masters, Demas Nwoko. Now, the reason why this importance is stressed in this course is that in us trying to define what can be truly an African architecture, there is need to look beyond the physical, beyond what we see. There is need for us to examine the functional aesthetics. What are the reasons why the African designs were represented the way they were? Besides bioclimatic reasons, what are the conceptual reasons? What are the planning reasons? What are the precepts that led to the concept that guided traditional architecture? And how can those be used to create a viable and valid Africanist architecture? So this is what this course does. It doesn't, like I said, even though it's centered on Igbo and Bamileke architectures of Cameroon, two very similar cultural architectural climates, it really presents an opportunity for us to begin to look at African architecture beyond what we see, examining the concept, even the structural systems, and the planning ideologies, and what those are based on. And I believe that in doing this very thoughtfully, we can even begin to arrive at a listing criteria for contemporary African architecture, where they do exist. Listing criteria could be, again, beyond the physical, could be beyond the what we call the beauty. It could be based on functional aesthetics. It could be based on religion. It could be based on culture. But I know there is something very, very common. And that is one of the things that we try to determine and examine in this course. So I'm going to stop so far. Hopefully, you guys will find this introduction appealing and, you know, come on board with participating in the courses. Thank you.
Oh, hello, everybody, again. My name is Shalma Yamana Burhan, as mentioned earlier. I am practicing architect, interior designer, researcher, and strategist between Los Angeles and Harlem. I studied architecture and Africana studies at Cornell University. I've worked with a bunch of global leaders such as Architectonica, Woods Bagot, and HOK. I started my practice called Felamaye 2017, where I focus on the adjacencies of cultural anthropology, computation, and social justice. The name of my course is called the Anti-Developed Clinic, The Becoming of a Design Culture. It's a six-week experimental studio that interrogates the strategies of how design cultures are created and sustained through contemporary orders. Colonial traumas in Africa have said, okay, this is completely fine. We're building, we're developing, we're becoming like the Western and New World. But the hodgepodge of styles and the methods from the different cultures that are being put together in these societies from different eras just reads to be extremely culturally confusing. While some people can consider that post-colonial architecture development to be progress, or the celebration of that to be progress, it's really just neocolonialism under the guise of development, and meaning the ideas and policies maintaining the African focus of what imperialism and control is still being left on a platter. So what I wanted to go through here, next slide. 6 weeks we'll be going into from micro to macro. We're going to start in East Africa with the African talismanic art practices of Ghetto One and magic Ethiopian scrolls. We'll be looking at the heritage. If you can see at the bottom there in the middle, there is this oldish looking inscription manuscript that comes from Ghetto One to the right, and how some of these storytelling of whether it comes from religion, whether it comes from other means and practices of everyday life, can be translated into design motifs in a more thoughtful and meaningful manner. On the right hand were 2 submissions that were licensed as a textile with Wolf Gordon. The one on the right is called Neon Mescal, and the one on the left of that is called Strings of God. You can see a lot of this inevitable cultural commodity process that is being done. Take things, small things, big things, depending on the scale. A lot of designers from the West will come and be intrigued by a certain element. They'll mistranslate it and they'll turn it into the new narrative of what that design culture means. So week 2 and 3 will really be focusing on how Africa has been used as a carte blanche situation to essentially have Westerners do whatever they want and how this needs to be stopped. Just a quick example, a lot of people celebrate the work of Arturo Mazzetami, who essentially built the celebrated architecture that is in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. But you know, the story is that he was not even a practicing architect. It's essentially the rejects of all of the Western society that came into these places across the continent to start new lives for themselves and create new identities, and essentially use those in power to guide their creative conscious and how that could potentially skew in the present day. Week 3 is really conversation with EK. He will talk about technology methods that are being used in the present day. You know, there are a few nations that we won't even mention here who have really had their hand in the older scramble for Africa. And I think that now in design, we're using technology as a means to get back in. So we'll be talking about how to take patterns, motifs in design, scaling them in different capacities, whether it's a textile, whether it's a landscape, as you can see on the bottom left-hand corner in Leimert Park, whether it's an actual cityscape, if you can see on the left-hand corner. So yeah, this class is open to everybody, and you know, we can talk about different things, and I look forward to talking to you more about it.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Yakubu Aminu Dodo, and I'm a graduate of Ahmadu Bello University, and that's my alma mater, and I did my PhD in University of Technology, Malaysia. I'll be the instructor for sustainability in African traditional architecture. But before I move on, I would like to just ask the house to permit me to say happy birthday to one of our mentor, our senior colleagues. Okay, Sam Obu, I know you are here, and today is your birthday. What a coincidence. Happy birthday, sir. All right. So let me continue where I stopped. This course will be revealing, or will I say, we'll be presenting the African traditional architecture from the primary society to the present. Students examine buildings and the built environment as the product of traditional, and regarding the unique problem of designing with available building materials in Africa. The course develops essential tools for the evaluation and appreciation of African traditional architecture for the role it has played in conserving our environment. At this point, I would like to stop and re-emphasize that the role it has played in conserving our environment. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that the African traditional architecture in itself is so sustainable, because as we speak, we are in the current era whereby buildings are responsible for more than 30% for the cause of global warming. So most of the materials we use are unsustainable. If you look at the criteria that we use in rating green building, you'll find out that if you put any African building, subject it to that rating, you'll find out that the building itself is sustainable. So in my course, this is what we try to unravel. So the course we consider policy, technology, and awareness towards how we can move African architecture. It's a 6-week course, and the first week we will introduce African design, buildings, and the designers themselves, both the contemporary ones and those master builders. The course we delve straight into active and passive design strategies used in buildings. You'll find out that most of the rating tools, most of the green buildings that we design now are all based on the active process of designing, and which, so some certain extent, are not sustainable. We'll look into technology employed by African designers and builders, the current trends of African traditional architecture. If we look at this structure, is the masjid in Janneh in Mali. This masjid tells a lot of story. What story? This mosque square is always, once in a year, being maintained by a communal effort. The masjid, this masjid has been was built around 1400 AD and still stands. So once in a year, people come, they gather, and they maintain this building. It tells a lot about sustainability. Same earth was used to construct. And in the 4th week, we'll be looking at current trend of African traditional architecture. The 5th week, we'll look at sustainable framework for design and build in African context. In the 6th week, it's divided into 2 segments. We have the normal presentation from the participant to see how we can identify criterion or criteria for rating Afrocentric architecture. Then 6A is to empower the building stakeholders with skills and role of Afrocentric architecture in solving sustainable issues. Meaning, in my own course, it's like that part that tie down almost all the courses that will be presented in CPDI Africa, because my course will be like a voice for the voiceless architecture of the African people. We'll be looking at how to come up with a rating system that we can use as a metric to enlighten people that our architecture is sustainable on its own. So we look forward to come up with a rating system in this course, which we've started from our first session. We've seen so many agendas that we might even push forward. The course is like entwined together with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I tell you, and I hope you will join my course as we look forward in telling our story ourselves, the African way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dodo. If you don't mind, sorry. I really appreciate your kind word.
Thank you. Thank you, Akita.
All right. Good evening, everybody. So my name is Dr. Toki Loughton-Brown, and my course will be looking at assessing Afrocentric buildings for West African cultural landscape. So this course, well, okay, so let me start with my background. I have a PhD in economics and environmental architectural heritage, which means that I tend to look at a lot of cultural landscapes. I've done a lot of work with the International Committee on Monuments and Sites, and I'm also part of the scientific, International Scientific Committee on Cultural Landscapes. So, which means I look at nomination dossiers for review, which means I look at cultural landscapes and assess them. And it also means that I have to come up with conservation character assessments for these areas. And this is why it's very important that before we place new buildings on cultural landscapes, that we need to understand the region so that we are not divorcing ourselves from our very in-tuned environmental regions. And this is the reason for this course. Next slide. So week one, we'll be looking at new builds, heritage, and cultural landscapes, as I said. And if you look at the pictures, you see the Timbuktu profile, which is the #2 picture that looks like, that cultural landscape. There's something very similar with that. So this is what I call fractals. So they all have the same elements pertaining to them. So this is an African cultural landscape. So fractals are a rough, fragmented geometric shape that are split into parts, each of which is approximately a reduced size, a copy of a whole, so a self-similarity. And you see that in everything that is African. You see that in the fabrics, you see that with our hair, you see that in every element that we have, which is also missing whenever we're talking about cultural landscape. We tend to forget that this is an organic mathematical sequence. We also need to also remember that, okay, in week 2, where we're talking about culture and economic values, how this pertains to African ways of thinking. So we design with our senses, we design with binary codes, we design with frequency. And all of that is important within the African heritage and the African community, which is really missing now in planning. When you look at what's going on in Africa, we are in chaos with our environment because we are no longer following this sequence, this mathematical sequence. And it's funny to see how Fibonacci, we all talk about Fibonacci sequences now, and we forget that he grew up in Egypt, which means this is central to our very thinking. This is the essence of what makes our cultural landscapes. Even with the way we build, you can see that with the landscape. Look at the green area with in Rwanda. Can you see how that landscape is in sequence? You see how they've built in a self-similarity manner to that cultural landscape, which we're missing now. We're going all squares and we're doing the cookie cutter thing, taking it from Western countries and imposing that on our landscape. So this is not limited to just architecture, it's recursive patterns that echoes throughout. And this is what my course will be looking at, and how we assess submissions, specifications for projects, and how we visually impact on our cultural landscape. So I hope to see you guys in the course. Thank you.
So I saw a chat, somebody mentioned in the chat how much the courses were. So all the 10 courses that will be offered in session 2 are flat rate of $250. Historically, the cost of design education has been one of many reasons why we don't see BIPOC people continuing on to higher means of pursuit. So, you know, just in the US alone, the average cost for bachelor, not a professional degree, a 4-year degree in architecture is around $180,000. You know, and we're trying to really level the playing field by making these courses as accessible as possible. For those who are coming from Africa, we're very thoughtful of the fact that, you know, $250 might also be too much. So if you are in that position, you have no shame whatsoever, go ahead and scan the code that you see here. We'll also provide a link in the chat for you to submit a scholarship application. We really don't want money to be a factor as to why you can't be receiving this type of information to supplement your courses, whether you are currently enrolled in design school. Let me take it back. You have to be enrolled in design school in order to receive these courses. So if you are in one of these, on the left-hand side, if you're in one of these disciplines, go ahead. You're going to get a discount. And if you have any questions about financial issues, go ahead and email cpdiafricascholarship@gmail.com. Next slide. And this is going to be presented by Lauren Jackson.
Thank you for that introduction, Falema, and thank you everyone for being here. It's been awesome just to hear all the course presentations, and I'm sure each of you all understand why the global study is important, but we just wanted to share some, personal reflections from people who have been involved with CPDI Africa thus far. And, it highlights, you can read the ones that are listed here, but it really highlights us understanding our own cultural heritage and then being able to see that reflected in the education we receive about the built environment. And then also looking at materiality, that's why it's important to have these courses. We need to understand materials that are vernacular to our respective climates and, landscapes, like Dr. Toki talked about, just being very aware of context. So it's very important that we all know and understand these things, and also be taught by, those who came before us, the elders in our communities, and understand how our history can actually be healing to us, fighting the destruction of colonialism and disenfranchisement and cultural erasure that we've experienced for so many centuries. So yeah, we hope, after hearing all these presentations, you understand why it's important. And I personally look forward to seeing everyone in class.